Hello and welcome to the Goonatal, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our Managerial Tactical Breakdown series. Of course, the show in which I get the latest insight, the news, the real sort of in-depth knowledge about possible candidates that could be at Arsenal very soon, or maybe never, or hopefully at some point. And we just don't really know what's going on at Arsenal in terms of the managerial situation. 1 minute Emery's here, the next minute he's not. Who knows? I mean, it looks more and more likely that this series might be fairly long running until the point at which a change is actually made. But that just gives us more time to look at some more candidates in depth from the experts and get that expert journalistic knowledge. And today is no different. This is our third episode. The first two, Luis Enrique and Marco Rosa as well, two different managers. And we've got a different nationality manager once again for the third episode in Bruno Lage. Now, I am joined by Tom Kundert, who is of Portugal.net. Really fantastic website, really focusing and around Portuguese football. And Tom is massively in the know about Bruno Lage. He's going to give us all the info that we could possibly want. You may have not even heard of this manager. I certainly really hadn't until last season. A fairly unknown guy up until the point at which he got the main job at Benfica, was at the youth ranks. He's even spent some time at Swansea, not as a manager, but in the coaching setup. So he's been in and around England already, and maybe he'll take the step onto England sooner than we might think, and that is something that we're going to talk about in a little bit. If you're enjoying the series, please make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the channel with those notifications turned on. Plenty of shows coming up as we get back into the domestic football after the international break is over, with a couple of surprises on the way, I promise. So let's get straight into the show and ask Tom the first question, which really, since taking over as Benfica's number one guy, how has the young manager fared?
So how has Bruno Lage done since he took over at Benfica? Well, simple answer to that, absolutely brilliantly. He's been there almost a calendar year now, took over at the start of January 2019. And in the league, for example, his record is played 30, drawn 1, lost 1, won 28. Absolutely incredible record. When he took over, they were lagging quite far behind Porto, about 7 or 8 points. Most people thought it was a bit of a formality that Porto would go on to win the league, reclaim their championship for a second straight year, but Benfica just completely turned around their season under Lage. He turned them into a non-stop attacking a team. They scored just goal after goal after goal, broke all sorts of records, scoring more goals than they had done since the 1960s, in the days of Eusebio. He really did have an incredible impact. How did he do it? Mainly by getting the very best out of Benfica's youth players, who he knew back to front, because he was actually promoted from the B team, which is mainly made up out of Benfica's youth players, and it also worked in the youth ranks on and off for quite a few years at Benfica. So he knew how to get the very best out of them, none more so than João Felix, of course, who had an absolutely incredible second half of the season. He had been playing for Benfica in the first half of the season, but it was Bruno Lage who really got the most out of him, changed his position, made him second striker, and he was just magnificent. Scored 20 goals, which of course we have to remember is the teenager, 19. So very unusual for that to happen in Portugal, and of course led to his huge transfer, 126 million to Atletico Madrid in the summer. Interesting thing about Bruno Lage also is that when he was made Benfica coach initially, he wasn't the first choice. Benfica actually targeted Jose Mourinho. They made quite an effort to bring him back to Portugal, but the president couldn't persuade Mourinho to come back, and so they opted for Lage initially on a temporary basis, but he did so well, ended up staying there for the whole season.
Now, tactics are really important when it comes for Arsenal making a decision about who we should bring in. We know that we are starved of an attacking force at this team with so many opportunities in the playing staff that we currently have. What type of style and tactics would Bruno Lage employ, and what does he currently use at Benfica?
In terms of tactics, the main thing Bruno Lage did was really set Benfica up to be a very attacking team. Usually played 4-4-2, actually almost always played 4-4-2. I suppose you could call it even 4-4-1-1, because João Felix was quite often a little bit behind the top striker, Haris Seferovic. But, he always made sure Benfica were on the front foot. His predecessor, Rui Vitória, also played that system a lot, but kind of interchanged it with 4-3-3. and sometimes took a bit more of a circumspect demeanour, especially in the big games. But Bruno Lage definitely made Benfica play on the front foot from start to finish. He liked to double pivot also in midfield. That was usually Gabriel, Brazilian, and Luís Florentino, young Portuguese player, at the base of midfield, which gave them a good base to work on. And then basically all the rest of the players are very attack minded. I think a lot of it also has to do with mindset. He sets Benfica up to definitely try and take control of the game, try and dictate the game. There was actually his only defeat so far in the league was to Porto earlier this season, and Porto stopped Benfica by they did a good job nullifying them, took up quite a physical approach, you can say, and I think most of their game plan, which actually worked very well, was to nullify the opposition rather than trying to be creative themselves. And at the end of that press conference, it was very interesting because Bruno Lage just came straight out and he said, okay, fair play, Porto won that, but you'll never find Benfica playing that way under me. So that kind of gives you an idea of, at least at Benfica, what a attack-minded coach he is. I'm not sure, of course, how well that will translate in other realities, in other leagues, because in Portugal, top teams, Benfica, Porto and Sporting, so much better than the rest that really they had to spend almost every minute of every game on the attack. But certainly, I think you could definitely label him from the evidence so far as an attack-minded coach.
Now, Arsenal have come into a sort of golden era of having these youth players burst through the ranks, signing players like Martinelli, as we've mentioned in previous shows. But how does Bruno Lage employ youth already? Knowing that he came up from obviously the B side at Benfica, is it something that's bred through the youth ranks into the first team? And how good is he at transitioning those players?
So in terms of using their youth players, Benfica and their president has made a big play on making that really a central policy of his mandate. He's been Benfica president for a long time now, I think over a decade and a half or so, and for the last 10 or 12 years he's been saying year after year after year that he wants to build a Benfica side almost made entirely out of youth products, players coming through their Seychelles academy. Now, for years that just seemed a bit like empty promises because their best players were sold almost as soon as they made any kind of impact and caught the eye of bigger clubs abroad. And but to be fair, maybe the last 3 or 4 seasons, I suppose, Benfica have been using more and more of their youth players. And last season under Lage was definitely the season where they had most impact. As I mentioned before, Lage was previously the B team coach. He also worked with the youth team, so he knew these players inside out. And as well as João Felix, of course, who made such a fantastic impact. There were about 5 or 6 players from the youth setup who really did, play a very big contribution to Benfica's success last season. Players like Luís Florentino, holding midfielder, both centre-backs, Ruben Dias and Ferro, all very young players, and all of them are really pretty much ever-presence under Lage as soon as he took over. So, yeah, that's definitely one part of, you could say, his management style since he's been at Benfica. Without a doubt, he does make very big use of the youth players at his disposal.
Now, obviously, it is important to think about the final question being about how likely a move to England might be in the near future. Hopefully, fingers crossed, nearer than what some of us probably are expecting right now. But how likely is it that we could see a move to England materialise?
So how likely is that Bruno Lage will be off to England at some point in the near future? Well, that was your question, in the near future. I can't really see that, to be honest. He hasn't really had a full year as a first-team coach here at Benfica. He has done very well, there's no doubt about that. But, it's one thing being successful at Benfica, over one year. It's another thing, proving you've got what it takes to be successful in another environment. So far, I think he's impressed everyone with the way he's handled himself. Well, first of all, of course, the way he's got Benfica playing and the success he did last season especially did absolutely brilliantly to pull back what looked like a lost situation in the league and win the league again. In terms of, I was just mentioning there also, he's impressed people with the way he handles himself in press conferences. He always seems, very calm, very lucid, very eloquent in his press conferences, good-humoured as well. But he seems to, more importantly than that, of course, be able to get his message across to the players, have a very good relationship with them. And so, in terms, I suppose you could say he's very media friendly. He's also been in England before, of course. He was the assistant coach of Carlos Carvalhal at Sheffield Wednesday. So, I've got absolutely no doubt, like basically every Portuguese coach and every Portuguese player, they do have ambitions to step up to a more high-profile league. So, that might be the case with Bruno Lage, but I think we have to hold fire yet because, for example, in Europe, they did quite well last season, got to the quarterfinals of the Europa League. This season, they've been disappointing, very disappointing, really, in the Champions League. And, for, I think, a lot of foreign chairmen or club presidents, that's probably what they look at more than, what they do domestically, what Portuguese managers do domestically. But, we all know that Portuguese coaches, they've got quite high profile abroad, thanks to that man, of course, Jose Mourinho, and of course in England we've got Marco Silva and Nuno Espirito Santo. So who knows, maybe one day Bruno Lage will go there as well, but I think that day, if it does come, is not anytime soon, to be honest.
A huge thank you to Tom Kundert. You can find him at Portugal1 on Twitter. I think that has really sort of changed my mind. I don't say changed my mind about who I'd go for. Marco Rosa is definitely my number one pick. But it goes to show that we can look at different candidates around Europe, and there's some really exciting younger managers in their 30s and their 40s that are around and possible, and even maybe gettable, depending on what happens around Arsenal in the coming next 6 to 12 months or so. And we could actually see some really exciting, maybe even slightly unknown talent at Arsenal in a managerial position in the near future. Let's not disregard people just because they haven't won the Champions League or they're not too well known. I think that Arsenal have gone out in the past and brought in some really, really left field choices that have done some really, really great things. So it might be interesting to see if we can do that again, possibly with Bruno Lage. Again, huge thanks to Tom. Please make sure you go check him out on Twitter and obviously find ourselves at the Gooner Talk TV there too. I will see you again very, very, very soon for another episode of this, and of course looking into more details about plenty of other stuff going on around the Gunners. I'll see you again very, very soon, and as always, up the Arsenal.